Been talking a lot about one particular issue for the last few weeks, and that would be the New Brunswick Native groups from all across Canada apparently getting involved in these blockades that have been happening in an area near New Brunswick. And they're protesting, they're blocking the shale exploration. And it's been getting quite violent. I think it was near a community called Rexford in the last couple of weeks. It got very violent. Members of the Micmac Nation were involved. A number of warrior groups, as I said, coming from across Canada also got involved. So we're going to continue with the discussion on this because they are once again planning another blockade to blockade the shale exploration by a company that has licenses to do it. So they're allowed to do it. So will they do it again, and how long will it last? They say they're going to do it for up to 4 days. So we're joined by Gary McHale, who not only, has been very outspoken on this topic because you live in the community of Caledonia, an area I was very familiar with growing up, but I don't even recognize it today. Not only have you been outspoken on it, you've written a book about it. Called
Yes.
Victory. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the book that is launching, I guess, this Saturday. But let's talk about the situation unfolding in New Brunswick with this blockade going up in the next few days.
Well, what we have is we have various radical natives, and it's really a very few in the community. And they come from across Canada. The same thing happened in Caledonia. Very quickly, you get a few from Quebec, a few from New York State, a few from BC. And so it looks like there's 50 or 100 natives, but they're not from the area. Mm-hmm. And so they don't represent, like Six Nations, close to 20,000 people. And yet you had really only about 40 or 50 that were involved in what was going on.
But they're obviously pretty powerful because they completely shut down Caledonia, and they've been holding it hostage, I think, fair enough to say, to this day.
Well, powerful in the sense of what really happens is you have 3 or 4 natives show up to a subdivision, and as I cover in the book, immediately there'll be like 50 police officers that will show up and block the owner from using his own property. So it won't be the natives who will stop the trucks from going in to build the houses. It'll be the police who will turn around the trucks because we're here to keep the peace. It'll be the police that actually enforce the will of the natives upon the property owners.
Right, and we're talking really about a couple of rogue groups who call themselves warriors.
Yes.
Some people call them terrorists.
Well, it was interesting. Back in 2006, the Canadian military had put in one of their documents that the Mohawk warriors were an insurgent group. Of course, there was a backlash in the liberal media, and the Harper government changed the report, so we don't want to call the Mohawk warriors really what they are. I mean, the OPP actually in court had declared that they are an organized crime unit. Mm-hmm. They were created for one purpose only. The purpose was to provide protection for the smuggling ring between the United States and Canada. And that's in their own documentation. That's what they were created for, was to enable the tobacco smuggling, the alcohol, the gasoline, smuggling of people, drugs, guns. And they're the muscle behind the organized crime groups. Now, they wrap themselves up in a native flag, and all of a sudden they're supposed to be, acceptable. But truthfully, even in their own documentation, their motives are to protect the smuggling trade.
Okay, so I was actually quite surprised to hear the comments out of one NDP leader, Dominic Cardy, who is the New Brunswick NDP leader, who had this to say. If you can say, bring up that board. He writes that position, simply stated, is that provincial legislators will not participate in any negotiations with First Nations until all illegal activity and acts of intimidation cease. Those are pretty strong words coming from, I think, a person that you would generally see leaning the other way. Because so many times, Gary, we see politicians bending to this kind of bad behavior.
Well, I think the public, and therefore politicians, are getting fed up with this. Because it's not like it goes once every 10 years. It's like every year now, every summer.
I don't think it's every year. It seems to be happening now all the time.
Constantly. Matter of fact, if they, in this year alone, the OPP report, there's over 80 occupations by natives in Ontario alone. That was back in August. Mm-hmm. So the number of occupations, which rarely get reported, have increased, and their demands are always the same. Like, they're above the Canadian law, that somehow the system is not theirs, and that they don't have to obey anything, right? But if you look at the treaties,
but clearly, if you look at look, in this particular situation in New Brunswick, there was a court order put into place saying move the blockade. It took the police 3 weeks to finally move in and listen to the injunction. Injunctions are not optional. When a court rules, if a judge rules that the blockade must go, it must go. But the police, for whatever reason in this country, do not seem to want to move.
Well, that's consistent with what happened in Caledonia. What happens is that in Canada, your property rights are not only protected by the criminal code, meaning that you as a citizen can protect your own property, but so can corporations. But the police have a duty under the Property Act to arrest trespassers. But what they say to everybody who's not a native is, you must go get an injunction. Once the injunctions are issued, in Caledonia there was over 6 of them issued, the OPP just simply don't obey them. So the police, across Canada, don't pay attention to injunctions, force companies to spend the $50,000 to get them, and then finally when the media gets involved, then they say, oh, okay, we better enforce the injunction.
Well, I think in this case, they forced the injunction because they realized that there was a stockpile of weapons that was clearly becoming a public threat. But, we've seen such violence in New Brunswick. We saw the burning of police cars once the police finally did move in, and since then, we've seen them bully some of these Native groups, bully the media. We've seen then, on the other hand, our own Josh Skrunek, one of our reporters, was told by the OPP where he could and couldn't shoot, even though he was on public property. Well, that's consistent as well what happened in Caledonia as well, because the media gets targeted very, very quickly in these occupations, because the natives are going to watch what's going on in the media. If you run a negative story, all of a sudden your camera gear will be stolen, as happened in Caledonia, or they smashed out the windows of the CBC van and other things like this. And that's the way they intimidate the media. The police, under the disguise of keeping the peace, will then approach the media and tell them to behave themselves, because of course they're getting the natives upset. And you don't want that. Right, and you don't want that. Because apparently there are 2 sets of laws. It just seems to become clear. There are 2 sets of laws, and of these warrior groups, they believe that they are running their own law. Well, and who in the government tells them they're not? Like, has Harper come out, or McGinty, or... Well, Harper did condemn, I think, the last bit of violence in New Brunswick, but he didn't say much about Caledonia. And the Liberal government certainly didn't say much. They just gave money to make the problem go away. Well, that's, I think, what really happens in a lot of these occupations. It's a big moneymaker. Virtually every Native person who... It's a big moneymaker, except if you're the everyday guy. Sure, but if almost every Native who actually was charged with a crime in Caledonia was put on the negotiation table and made lots of money. One Native guy who was pulling the tower across the road on a regular basis, he made $300,000 in 2 years from the McGinty government. Now, that's pretty good money for being part of committing crimes. You've written a book, Victory in the No-Go Zone. Quickly, how do people get their hands on this book? And just give us a summary of what this book is about. The book is now on sale in Chapters, Amazon, and also you can get it from the publisher, freedompress.ca. The book actually covers what the OPP emails say and what the officers say in court, what government lawyers are saying in court, because the people should understand that there's a systematic method being used by the police and government lawyers to undermine our justice system. And it shows in their own words how they know they're arresting people that they know have committed no crimes as a way of overlooking and covering up for crimes committed by Native protesters. I guess when 10 years ago, I guess you didn't think your life would be about this, but it really has become about this issue because it's affected you so greatly. Absolutely. I've been arrested 9 times. They tried prosecuting me several times. Not a single case was ever made at the trial. They just come up with these charges as a way of overlooking. Like when a Native guy comes at me with a baseball bat, it'll be me that'll be put on there in handcuffs and taken away and put in jail, supposedly to protect me. They don't arrest a Native guy with a baseball bat. No, it's unfortunate because the town of Caledonia, which was always such a lovely, peaceful town, it doesn't look anything like it did as a child when I went there. Well, the town is fairly peaceful now. It is, but there's an attitude change. There's absolutely. And there's no construction, no one feels it's safe to build homes. And who can buy a home there or create a family and a life there without fear of thinking, well, if I sign this document, is someone going to come and take it? They blocked the main highway for 6 hours in support of New Brunswick just a week ago. Right. So it's going to be ongoing all the time. All right, you're doing a book launch this Saturday? This Saturday, yes. Where and when? Old Mill Inn. You can get information on the freedompress.ca. The Old Mill in Toronto, not Ancaster, we should point out. In Toronto. Yes. It's a lovely area this time of year. It starts at 10 o'clock and you have to get tickets online. Good stuff, Gary. Thank you so much for joining us today. Well, I guess we'll keep our eye on this because it's not obviously going to go away anytime soon. Gary, thank you so much.